2020. We've been going through what it means to be intentional about our faith this year. Because so many of us are just like, hey, I hope something good happens in my relationship with God this year. Let's see what happens. Right? We kind of have this kind of hit or miss idea. And like I said, we kind of tend to wait to think till someone else inspires us to do it. Or somebody else, I hear a good sermon and it makes me want to go change stuff. And then I'll have to hear another good sermon next week before I actually do anything about it. That's not how God called us to live. He said, remain in me. Make your home in me. And then we will see things happen. And then that is how fruit is produced in your lives. And so if we're going to follow that through, we got to be intentional about it. So we've been talking this idea of what we've been calling a rule of life. A rule of life, it's a spiritual discipline that essentially is saying this is a structure for us to build our life on. Let's not just be kind of haphazard about our spiritual growth. A rule literally comes from the Latin word that means trellis. This is not a bunch of rules we're giving you. This is a structure. A trellis is something that grapevines grow up, right? And they grow up it because that's what allows them to orient themselves towards the sun. It allows them to orient themselves towards upward growth. It allows them to produce fruit. If they stayed on the ground, the fruit would get rotten and things would eat it and step on it. They wouldn't be alive. But the trellis allows it to grow up and the trellis allows them to live. In the same way, our faith with God, in the interaction with Him, we have to have a structure for growing and orienting our hearts towards Jesus in all things, at all times. And so a good thing we've been saying is this rule of life idea is an exterior framework for an interior journey. That's what we're talking about. It's like the interior part of how are we growing spiritually with the Lord, and what are we doing to put a thing in place in our life so that can happen. The first week I gave you something that looked like this. This is a structure. It's not the structure. It is a structure that you could use. You could do it however you want. Some of you guys are like Excel people and you want to do a spreadsheet. Go for it. Knock yourself out. Right? Some of you guys are artists and you want to paint it on something. Paint it on whatever. It doesn't matter how you do it, but this is just a general guideline of a structure to start developing these practices in our lives intentionally. Now, I borrowed this from a friend at New Life Fellowship Church in New York City. Their church does this all the time, and so this is borrowed from them with permission, and he said totally use it. We have more. If you don't have one, they're out again on the Next Step station if you want to grab another one or you didn't get one to begin with. And we're just working through this, but if you notice at the middle of this structure, it starts and ends with Jesus. The middle of this thing is it's about giving and receiving the love of Christ in our lives, and out of that flows the ability to say, okay, because Jesus loved me so much, because He lavishly loved me beyond all that I could possibly imagine. Out of response to that love, I'm going to intentionally say, yes, God, I want my life to reflect more of you. Yes, Jesus, I want you at the middle of everything I do. I need my life centered on you. And that's what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, is how do we do that? What does that look like if our life is going to be specifically focused on Him? We started last week talking about the upward part. Remember I said there's 4 words that really kind of fit into a general rule of life, being up, connecting with God, in, out, and then with. Like these areas that we're talking about, being like prayer, being a word to remember, going up. How are we connecting with God vertically? What's our prayer life like? What's our scripture? What's our time connecting with Him? Okay, and this week we're going to talk about the next part of that, the inward part, developing a rule of life, this idea of rest. Rest. Now, this is a fun message, to be honest, so I might get a little bounce. I might kind of run back. I might get a little into this thing here today because it's a fun message, and it's one that I know we all resonate with, and one that I know that we need to hear. I'll tell you why I know that. I just read an article the other day saying that, this is in a finance website, saying that America is the #1 overworked developed country in the world. Amen. You guys know this. I don't even have to tell you this. You know what that means, right? It means that of all the developed nations in the world, Americans work more than anybody else. Anybody else. And that's not just adults, right? That's students too. If you're in this room, school feels like work, and you know the pressure of the busyness and the pace of life that you have to keep up with just to keep your head above water. This is everybody. You know what that means, don't you? We are a nation who needs a nap. That is what we are. That is where we are at currently. We are a nation who needs a nap. We are a society of people that are just exhausted all the time. You guys know this feeling, right? How many of you guys played the game when you were younger, King of the Hill? Remember play King of the Hill? You know what I'm talking about? Basically, King of the Hill, we would do this every winter where I grew up because, like I said earlier, we'd have these giant mounds of snow. And what would happen is you get all your friends together. One guy would be at the top of the hill. Everyone else's job was to charge this hill and throw him off the top and take over and see how long you could survive up there. Now, this game is awesome. when it's played correctly. All right, don't do this like when it's not snow. Don't do this like on a hill where there's just dirt and cement. You'll hurt yourself. But this was a fun game when you were a kid. And it was also a frustrating game because every time you got close to the top, you would get thrown back down the hill. And you had to climb back up this hill again because you weren't just fighting the guy at the top, you were fighting everybody else who was throwing you out of the way too, trying to get that guy down. And then if by some chance you did make it to the top of the hill and throw your friend over the edge, you're only up there for like 2 seconds before somebody else threw you back down. We know this feeling in everyday life. We know this feeling of work feeling like we're playing King of the Hill and we keep getting thrown back down. We know this feeling every day when it comes to laundry. You know this feeling in your house where you do laundry and you do hours of laundry and then you turn around and it's like you didn't do any laundry. It's like, where did all this come from? I just did all this and I folded it. Where did all this come from? We know this feeling when it comes to doing dishes. Are you kidding me? How many of you guys, you do the dishes, load the dishwasher, the sink is completely empty, you feel good about yourself, you turn around and you're like, oh my gosh, how was there 27 plates and 35 cups in the sink again? I just did all these, right? We know this feeling when it comes to email. Oh man, you get to work, you open up your inbox on Monday, you have 300 emails. You immediately delete 200 without even reading them because you don't care, right? And then you go through the other ones and you respond to the ones you feel like you need to, and you get to inbox 0 and you're killing your email. And then 5 minutes later, you have 30 more. You're like, this is craziness. You know this feeling with homework. If you're in school, it's like, just give me a break. I just did a project. Why do I have 10 more? Right? My kids, I have 3 boys. They always want to eat. It's like, seriously, I just fed you 5 minutes ago. How are you hungry again? It is non-stop, right? We get this feeling in our lives. We totally understand how it gets. And here's the thing about life. It seems like the work never stops. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn to stop. Okay, so here's the big idea of what we're talking about. We're talking about this idea that's called Sabbath today. Sabbath it's a discipline. It's part of what you read a lot about in Scripture. In Sabbath, here's the big idea of what Sabbath is all about. It is not a rule to follow. It is a gift to enjoy. I want you to remember that as we talk about Sabbath. Sabbath is a gift to enjoy. And we're going to unpack this more in the next few minutes. Specifically in a passage from the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 20. So we're going to turn there and talk how this plays out in everyday life. But it starts in Exodus chapter 20. If you want to turn there, or read with me. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of God. And on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. If this sounds familiar, it might, because this is a verse from the 10 Commandments. It's actually the 4th commandment that was given in the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Now you got to understand the context of the 10 Commandments before you can go any further with this thing. See, first of all, here's the number one thing you got to understand about the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were a response to Jesus setting people free, not a means of setting people free. The 10 Commandments were not a means of finding salvation. The 10 Commandments were given as a response to Jesus setting people free. So you understand that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And God came and set his people free. He brought them into freedom. And as a result of that, he gave them the 10 Commandments and said, here you go. These are not the means by which you earn salvation, but these are the response to the salvation that you've been given. These basically are rules that say this is how free people need to live. And so you find the 10 Commandments, and you find commandment number 4 talking about this idea of Sabbath and talking about the idea that we need to be people who live in freedom. And here's what it looks like to be a free person. Here's something that needs to be built into your life as a free person. It's a response to what God has done in our lives. See, the thing about religion, if some of you grew up religious, is that typically the religion is all about us acting and having God respond. But the gospel is all about how God acted and then we respond. And that is what the gospel, that is what happened. This is what the Ten Commandments did. It's a response to the fact that Jesus brought freedom into the lives of his people. And they responded by saying, okay, here's what free life should look like. So you've read the Ten Commandments. You also notice that commandment number 4 is the longest out of all of them. It takes up the most real estate in Exodus chapter 20 out of all. I don't know if you've ever thought about why that is. But actually, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 15 gives us a little bit of a clue as to why that is. It says this. It says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Here's why this is important. Here's why this is longer than all the other commandments. Because the Israelites, for the last 400 years before they were taken, before these commands were given, were slaves for 400 years. Their identity was slavery. That is what they did day in and day out. Work was not just something they did. Work was who they were. Okay, if you did not work, you did not live. Now, maybe you grew up in a family where you feel like that was your mantra as well. Like, you either get a job or what are you doing here, right? But the Israelites, that was their identity for 400 years, is slavery. And God gives them these things, and he gives them this command specifically in verse 4 to remind them that their identity is no longer that of a slave, but as a free person. Because God has set you free, because he is the one who saved you. It is not something that you earned because you worked hard enough for it. It is something that was given to you as a gift. So keep the Sabbath day every week as a reminder that it is not about your work, it is about what God has done. It's about what he has provided in your life that has brought freedom. And that is why I think commandment number 4 is one of the longest, because it takes time to explain to them your whole lifestyle that you knew, and your children knew, and their children knew, and their children knew was work. Work for it, work for it. You want to eat, you want to live, you better work. Now that you are free, your life needs to look different. And remember that work is not going to do it for you the way that it did back then. You don't earn God by working. You receive what he has done. And so keep this day as a reminder that you're no longer slaves. You are free. And learn to live like it. And so you have this commandment in Exodus chapter 4 setting that up. Now, before it seems like God is anti-work, let me just say he's not. God invented work. In fact, there was work before there was sin. Now, some of you guys might feel like your job is a result of sin. But it's not. I promise you, it's not a result of the fall. God put work into place as a very good thing. He gave Adam and Eve jobs to do in the garden. He is not anti-work at all. But here's the thing. When sin entered the world, sin took something and they twisted it, and they ruined it, and it made something different of it. So now the problem isn't work. Really, the problem that we struggle with is overwork. Right? Really, the problem we struggle with is feeling like work becomes our identity. How do I know that a lot of us, work has taken that place of becoming our identity? Well, I'll tell you. And it struck me when I heard another pastor say this, but work is the only commandment that we brag about breaking. Think about that. It's the only commandment we brag about breaking in our daily lives. Don't be like, hey, you guys, how many idols I worshiped this week? Yeah, ready? Yeah, I lied so many times this week, right? All these murders keep stacking up. No, we don't brag about the other 10 commandments breaking them, but we brag about the fourth one, right? You know why? Because when I talk to somebody, or even in how I respond, what's the number one thing is ask you how you're doing? What do we say? Busy. So busy, right? Busy. Why do we do that? There's 2 reasons. Number 1 is we want to preemptively let the other people know that I can't help you, right? If you're going to ask me for something, the answer is I'm busy. Like, don't bother me. I got stuff going on, right? That's why we use our busy. But the second reason is, honestly, we're busy. We have a lot of stuff going on. And the thing is we find our value in the productivity of what we do. We take that and we almost brag about how busy we are as a sign of achievement. Like, look how busy I am. Look at all these things I got done this week. And you have no idea how busy I am. Busy. Just killing it out there. I'm slaying it. Climbing the corporate ladder, right? Like we have that identity and we almost find our value in it. And it's not easy in the world we live in because they reward that kind of attitude, don't they? The world we live in rewards that kind of approach to life. They reward it with promotions. You're productive? Here's more to do. A little bit extra pay, maybe, maybe not, but here's more to do. You get promoted. You get upgraded. You do all these things. That kind of attitude of busy gets rewarded and gets encouraged. And who cares if you work 7 days a week? Who cares if you never see your family? Who cares if you're exhausted every single day? Look what you're getting done. Go you. Yay. Right? And we live that kind of lifestyle hoping for the pat on the backs, like, good job, you're such a hard worker. What we don't realize is that we're slowly giving away our soul to these things and living at a pace that never returns the results that we hope it does. And so Jesus steps into that kind of place and he says, yo, you guys are not slaves anymore. You might feel like your boss is a slave driver, but you are not slaves. You are free people. And in order to remember that freedom and live in the freedom that he graciously gives us, we need to push into the gift of Sabbath. We need to push into this gift and start to learn to live according to this rhythm. Because here's the thing, there are two types of rhythm you can live according to that we kind of have in this world. The first rhythm is what I call a secular rhythm. This is what a secular rhythm looks like. Work, 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 vacation. Thank you, God, right? Work, 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 vacation. Thank you. Work, 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 vacation. I need a vacation. That's the secular rhythm that most of us live along according to. Work, 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 maybe get a vacation. Deep down, we know that that is not a sustainable approach to life. That is not a sustainable approach to actually growing in joy and freedom and devotion with the Lord. In fact, most of us have experienced what they call post-vacation blues after your vacations. And you're like, I am so depressed, I have to go back to work the next day. In fact, we have this phrase where we're like, I need a vacation from my vacation, right? So obviously, vacation's not doing it for us. It's not. So what is a more sustainable rhythm that we were called to live according to? Here's what a Sabbath rhythm looks like. Sabbath, work. Sabbath, work. Sabbath, work. We learn to work from a place of rest, not to always need to rest from our work. That's what Sabbath provides us, is a place to breathe, a way to approach this world differently, approach our schedules differently. So we're not just living for the next vacation, hoping to get a little bit of a break, but we're actually enjoying the gift that God gives us and call us to have 52 vacations every year, right? One a week. To slow down, to breathe, the rhythm he's called us to. And it is a gift. In fact, Mark tells us, Jesus is talking, people are condemning him and saying, why are you doing all these things on the Sabbath? Jesus always got in trouble for breaking the Sabbath according to the religious people in the Bible. And he's like, let's just slow your roll for a second and think about this. Okay, the Sabbath was made for man. It is a gift that God created for us. It is not something we were made for. We don't serve the Sabbath serves us. It is a gift we were created to engage in. And so what is a Sabbath? A Sabbath is literally a 24-hour period with no have-tos or shoulds that leads to deep rest and renewal. This is a literal 24-hour period, which I know right now even saying that some of you guys are going, that's insane. I don't have 24 hours in my life to do anything, right? This is a literal approach to saying we got to change our schedules up. Sabbath is a 24-hour period with no have-tos. None of the I got to get this done. Your honey-do list does not count on that day. No shoulds. You should this, you should that. No. We're not, none of those. It's a day that is set aside for deep rest and renewal. That is what a biblical Sabbath is. That is what God gave us as a gift because we need it. And now, there's two approaches to Sabbath. We can either see it as legalism, and some of you grew up in a house where Sabbath was very legalistic. You had these are the things you cannot do on Sabbath. It's a list of don't. And it became very, very just boring, dry, and unfun. And so you're like, Sabbath goes out the window, right? Because I can't, it just seems binding and legalistic and no fun. Not what God intended it for. Others of you grew up where I've never even heard of Sabbath before. You're like, this is a brand new concept to me. And then there's other people in this room have heard of it but think it's irrelevant. Because it's like, isn't that Old Testament? We don't live according to that anymore. Like, we don't need that in our day and age. Here's what we're aiming for today, is somewhere in the middle of that saying, no, Sabbath is actually a life-giving spiritual practice that we build into our lives. To say Jesus matters and to keep him at the center, I need to slow down to recognize that he belongs at the center of my life. And so that is what Sabbath is. And so we're going to talk about Sabbath with 4 words as we wrap this up. Because you're probably thinking, all right, that sounds good. So what is it that I actually do on a Sabbath day? What am I actually supposed to spend my time doing if I actually make this fit into my schedule? If I work this in, what do I do? It's 4 words that I've heard another pastor, Pete Scazzaro, who wrote something we talked about, emotionally healthy spirituality. I've kind of paraphrased some of his stuff, but there's 4 words he bases Sabbath on, and I want to use those words and share them with you today. The first word is this: stop. The first word is stop. Okay, stop. The word Sabbath in Hebrew literally means to stop. You know, in the creation account in Genesis, we read how God stopped all his work on the 7th day. There wasn't an accident. God was not exhausted and had to go, man, whew, those 6 days were killer. Like, I need a day off, right? It's like, you guys all complain about your work during the 6 days. I just made Africa, right? Like, I need time off. That's not what God was doing. That's not what he was saying. God didn't take time off because he was setting a model, an example to say we stop what our work is for the day, or for the week, both paid and unpaid. Because now how many of you guys know we do a lot of unpaid work, don't we? A lot of things that are not paid, but we do, that feels like work. Stop. This is the day where you stop all of that. In our family, we always try to keep Friday as a Sabbath. Friday means, and my kids know this too, because they wake up Friday morning like, Dad, you don't have to do work today, right? Like, they know what Fridays are like in our house. They know that Friday night is family night with pizza and a game or a movie. They know that it's time that we're not doing anything else. And let me tell you, if you text me or call me on a Friday, unless it's an emergency, you won't hear back from me until Saturday. I'm not ignoring you. I'm not being rude. It's just that is work. And we really try hard to protect this time to have a Sabbath of rest. We want you to have that too. That's what God gives us. Don't always do it perfectly. Let me tell you that. We don't always do that perfectly. Very often I'm doing stuff that would not be what I should be doing on my Sabbath. But you got to figure out what you need to stop doing. Stop checking work emails, okay? Stop doing anything on there that has to do with work on that day. I know this can feel like getting rid of an addiction in your life, because very often work is an addiction. But it takes time to say, listen, we're stopping these things. And I was thinking of a great example in our culture of an example of what it means to stop and see how God blesses it. Now, many of you guys have eaten at the holy grail of chicken. Chick-fil-A. Yeah? Right? We all love some Chick-fil-A. Got to eat more chicken cow up there. We got a Chick-fil-A employee right here, right? We love Chick-fil-A. Love it, right? Here's the thing about Chick-fil-A that a lot of us know. They're closed on Sundays. Do you know that? You can't, as much as you want a Chick-fil-A sandwich right now, you can't get one until tomorrow, okay? That has always been their policy, is to stay closed on a Sunday, because Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, was a believer, and he based his entire business philosophy on the verse out of Exodus that we just read, where he says it, when he's talking about Sabbath, he says, on it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, and he took that to mean employees. The people he employed. And he said, if I'm going to have a day of rest, they need one too. And so he built that into his business philosophy. He made his sons guarantee to build it the way they ran Chick-fil-A after he passed away. That is what Chick-fil-A will always do. Now, let me tell you something. Chick-fil-A is the 3rd largest restaurant chain in the country. Here's what I want to show you, though. Here's what I want to show you. Chick-fil-A likely loses out on more than $1 billion in sales every year by closing on Sundays. Would you do anything? If someone offered you $1 billion, what would, seriously, would you be like, no, thank you, I'm good, I'm taking a day off? Is a day off worth $1 billion to you? It was worth $1 billion to them. They would be number 1 if they were open on Sundays. Think about that. But look how God has blessed the commitment to say, this is not about me. Essentially, he's like, we respond to a higher authority with what we do with our time and our money. Being the number 1 chicken restaurant in the country is not as important as being faithful to what God has called us to do, to rest, to reset, to make him a part of my life. It's not as important as stopping. In fact, this idea of Sabbath is so popular. How many of you guys know that Kanye West wrote a song about it on his new album? Closed on Sundays. Woo! Come on. You guys know Jesus is King? That's a good album. I'm going to tell you, I like it. Like, he wrote a song about it, Closed on Sundays, about this idea of Sabbath and the need to take a break. It is popular. People are getting this need in our culture, right? It is something we need to build in. There's this quote that I want to share from Wayne Muller, who wrote a book on Sabbath. And this is what he talks about. He says, we stop because it is time to stop. Sabbath requires surrender. I'm going to read that again. Sabbath requires surrender. If we only stop when we are finished, we will never stop because our work is never completely done. Sabbath requires surrender. It requires saying no to the idols of work and performance so we can intentionally say that our identity is found in God and His love and not everything else. Finding time to stop. Even if it means surrendering a promotion. I'm going to tell you, that's not an easy thing to do. Even if that means surrendering some things that you might stop to create room for this. The next word comes to Sabbath. What do you do on your Sabbath day? You rest. The Hebrew word for rest literally means exhale. Try that. Take a deep breath, let it out. Feels good, right? Maybe you guys haven't done that in a while. You know, I'll give you another free gift. Do it one more time. It just feels good to relax, rest. God calls us to rest on the Sabbath. He calls us to find time for recreation, literally recreation. That is what recreation is. It is a time we find the time in our week to do what we enjoy, that God recreates our soul as we rest in Him. So we find time to rest. Why do we rest? Because we are human beings, not human doings. And that is what we were created to be and how we were created to live. That is what God calls us to do, to rest. And not just the rest where we try to find a day off. Sabbath is not our American idea of a weekend. Okay, it's not an American idea of, no, Sabbath is a very intentional, internal plan for deep rest. It's like sleep. The quality of sleep matters, right? If you get deep sleep, you're much more rested than if you just kind of get shallow sleep or a really bad night's rest. This kind of rest is the deep internal rest we need that God offers us. It invites us to silence those voices of self-condemnation that tell you, what are you doing taking time off? You haven't done anything this week. You got so much more to do. You don't deserve a break. Let me tell you, Sabbath is not something you earn. It's something you're given as a gift. If you feel like you have to earn your time off, you're misunderstanding God's gift to you, to say you need to have a rest. You need to find time to rest. We rest in His acceptance and love. This is where we sleep in. Amen? Sleep in. It's a good thing. We stop rushing. I know we're South Jerseyans, but we don't have to rush everywhere. Right? We can slow down. We can pause. We take time to hold the door open for people. Let them go in front of us. It's a radical idea. Someone's trying to come in because of traffic. You let them in. You let their car come in front of you. Stop. You let people out of you let them go in front of you. People behind you start honking. You just wave and say, it's Sabbath. Right? Not rushing today. They'll deal with it. Right? Find time to slow down and rest. The next word is delight. We were created to delight in God. And I really do believe that there's no delight, there's no real Sabbath, because Sabbath is a day of joy. If you think about the creation account, after God created every day, what did He say? It's good, right? Oh, animals, good. Trees, birds, good. Man and woman, very good. Nice. He enjoyed what He created, right? He took time off on the seventh day, not just to rest. He took time off to model for us enjoyment and delight in what we've been given and the creation around us. Delight is extremely important. He rested on the seventh day to model it for us. And as we get older, we become delight deficient. Kids know how to delight. We don't have to teach them. They know how to enjoy things naturally and inherently because they're like, this is awesome. We get older, we forget that. Everything becomes a burden. Everything becomes like, how do I sneak more work in, right? Instead of stopping to delight in who God is. Do things that give you joy. Remember back when you enjoy life and you actually get to do things that brought life into your soul? Do those things. Find time to enjoy them. Eat food, good food. Slow food, not fast food. Enjoy it, right? Don't just shovel it in your face and move on. Read, hike, play music, play sports, draw, whatever brings life into your soul, delight in those things. Find time to do those again. Again, the gift to us. We were not created for it. It was created for us to enjoy and delight in those things. You ever wonder why Jesus healed all the time on the Sabbath? I've always wondered this if you read the Gospels. He gets in trouble all the time for people for healing on the Sabbath. I wonder why he did that. I think he did that because Jesus was modeling for us that the Sabbath was a day of healing and restoration, not just a day you have to keep legalistically to please some angry God somewhere. Jesus showed us, like, this is a day for healing, for restoral, for renewal. And that leads right into the last word, to think of worship. Sabbath is a day to worship. It's a day to start to make yourself aware of God's presence in your life. Exodus 20:10 says, the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Not a Sabbath to your wife, not a Sabbath to your kids. It's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. There is a worship component to a Sabbath where you slow down and you start to make yourself aware of God and his presence that is always around you and trying to speak to you. And so often we are so busy we miss it. It's a time to worship him and maybe read or pray or just do the things that fill you. Sabbath is not a time to take off from God. It is we're drawing closer to him through a Sabbath. It's an invitation to see the invisible in the visible that's all around us. Going to the beach, good activity to find rest. But until you sat down and felt the sun on your face and heard the waves lapping at the shore and just experienced the fact that this is all God and his majesty is all around me, you haven't really begun to engage in Sabbath until you start to create that awareness, right? Worship him. It's not just taking time off. Eugene Peterson says that Sabbath is a combination of praying and playing. I love that because it's so true. That's what we're talking about. So the big question as we end today is this. When talking about Sabbath, it forces us to ask this question. Who is in control? Is it you or is it God? Who runs the world? Is it you or is it God? Because sometimes we feel like if we take a day off, it's going to fall apart. Right? Many of you guys know that song, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. He's got the whole world in his hands, right? Very often we sing, we've got the whole world in our hands, right? That's how we kind of approach that song, saying like, God needs us to pull this thing off. And if we rest, I don't know what'll happen. You know what? Sabbath is an invitation to remind us that Jesus is the one who holds it all together, not us. Invites us to rest and step back and go, God, this has always been by you, for you, and through you, not because I have anything to do with it. It invites you to step back and enjoy that fact. It's a great example of the gospel, because on the Sabbath, we accomplish nothing, and God loves us anyway. It's a great reminder of the gospel. So there's this quote by Shelley Miller in a book she wrote called Rhythms of Rest, Finding the Spirit of Sabbath in a Busy World. And it says, Sabbath isn't about resting perfectly. It's about resting in the one who is perfect. So we're not going to always get this right. This is just a primer. You could talk for hours about this or just kind of clip the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Sabbath. It's not about always doing this. It's about recognizing where our rest comes from. If you're feeling hurried, if you're feeling restless, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling rushed and busy, if your answer to everybody is busy all the time, then God is inviting you into a different way of living. He's inviting you into a way that says, that's the treadmill that's going to kill you. How about we step off of that into the gift that I've given you to rest and to relax and to find that time that works. A Sabbath for you might be really hard to even think about right now. If you're like, there's no way I can find 24 hours in my week to do this. Start with 12. Start with 6. Start with 3. Start with something where you are building intentionally Sabbath into your life, because everybody's schedule is different. You can't say Sabbath has to be, if Sundays work for you as Sabbath, that's good, but for me, Sunday's a work day. I can't take Sabbath on Sunday. Some of you guys, Sunday's a work day for you too. What is the day of the week that allows you to encounter Jesus and a Sabbath rest? Because again, it's a gift, not a have to. It's a gift we get to do because Jesus loves us. And he wants us to know that we can rest in him and the world will not fall apart. And it actually rejuvenates our soul to be able to face the other 6 days of the week without feeling like we're going to just dry up. Sabbath is a gift. Will you engage it? So I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up and close this out. I just want to pray. as I do, just remind you, man, that the Sabbath is not a rule we have, gift we get to do. Whatever it looks like as you are creating this rule of life, this idea of how you're building this in, start with something. But again, be flexible. Like I said, we've been talking about this idea of rule of life. It is not a hard and fast contract. It is a chance to grow and figure out what works for you. Do it with your family. If you have kids, create a family Sabbath day. If you don't, do it with your spouse. Do it with your friends. Even if you go to school and hey, we're going to create this idea of Sabbath, and we're going to read this together, and we're going to talk about this. I don't know. There's lots of different ways to do this. There's no hard and fast way. The point is that God gives it to us and says, we need this. He modeled it for us. It was his idea. He said, remember, you're no longer slaves. Work can make you feel like a slave again. You're not a slave to work. You are a free person because of what Christ has given you and what he offers you. And he invites you into that rest. So God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the gift of Sabbath. Thank you for the connection you want us to have with you by slowing down, taking a day off, taking time to intentionally connect with you, to stop and rest and delight and worship in all that we have around us. God, thank you for that. Thank you for giving us that. Thank you for inviting us into the space that our souls need to survive, to thrive in this world. Lord, we love you. Pray right now your Holy Spirit would drive us to you. It would pull and point and poke at the places that you're calling us to maybe even give up so that we can have this idea of Sabbath rest, the idea of spending time with you. Lord, we just pray this week that you would bless us with finding that time, and that you would come alive as we seek to be people who live from a place of rest in you, seek to be people who live from a centered life with you in the middle.